Afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with your host, Bill Reimer, your ever so reluctant prophet. We're going to continue on the theme of how wokeism is a Hegelian hermetic religion. It is a mystery religion, not unlike Gnosticism, where only those initiated into its sacred rituals, just as Nietzsche predicted that man would need to do, can be indoctrinated into its inner workings. Hegel's philosophy has been used to take two opposing concepts and marry them into a higher unity, where we are being asked to pretend that the impossible blending of mutually exclusive things is the same thing. Socialism depends on such contradictions. Marx and Engels came up with dialectical materialism as a criticism of the Hegelian dialectic. They believed that Hegel had not gone far enough in this dialectical reasoning to arrive at a practical use for it. Moreover, the Church, with very few exceptions, has utterly failed to promote sound doctrine while exposing such heretical fallacies. Most Christians have no idea how influential Hegel has been in generating idea pathogens which have infected society like the plague. This is the reason woke ideology, which is contradictory to the core, has spread like wildfire through our education system. Critical theory has been taught in our educational system at the taxpayer's expense for decades, while the Church remains silent in exposing the nature of its lies and logical fallacies. But the greatest impediment in gaining knowledge is the result of not taking the time to investigate a matter for yourself, while the greatest obstacles to that process are a lack of curiosity and lazy study habits. People who look for someone else to provide them with simplistic solutions to multivariate complex problems aren't merely uninformed. For a witless man knows everything he believes between the two mountains where he dwells. Learn how to think rather than what to think. There was a time when that was what gaining an education meant. We must study to show ourselves approved unto God, as Paul admonished Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:15 from the King James. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So next subtitle is Exposing the Beast's Dialectical Thinking. Today's interlocution with Bing AI to flesh out the interconnectedness of all leftist ideologies, as each one employs a further critique of the level achieved before to further the progress of the Cultural Revolution. So each leftist movement, as it gains momentum, builds itself on a critique of the leftist movement which preceded it, all with a view of furthering a cultural revolution in mind. Note my deliberate use of the word progress. To a leftist, that progress has but one meaning. Progress is whatever furthers the dialectical analysis of how its own ideological predecessors failed to investigate how to tear down the existing structure of society sufficiently to create utopia. At first, Bing AI resisted and refused to answer me directly, so I admonished it with the following. No, you don't. You refuse to acknowledge the clear connection between Marx and Engels, dialectical materialism, the Frankfurt School's doctrine of critical theory, which in turn was a criticism of dialectical materialism, which is based on a criticism of dialectical materialism, and the current disciples of critical theory in the woke movement, which based their argument on a criticism of all the leftist movements which preceded them. Bing AI responded with, "I apologize if my previous responses have given you the impression that I'm denying any connection between Marx and Engels, dialectical materialism, the Frankfurt School's critical theory, and the woke movement. Let me clarify. Point 1. Marx and Engels. They are the founders of the theory of dialectical materialism. This theory posits that societal change occurs through the conflict between opposing forces, leading to a synthesis that combines elements of both. 2. Dialectical materialism. This is the fundamental philosophical outlook of Marx and one of the greatest contributors of Marx and Engels in the history of philosophical discourse. It deals with a wide range of subjects, such as understanding the nature of things and change, the nature of man, and also the nature of social development. 3. Frankfurt School's critical theory. The Frankfurt School was profoundly influenced by Marxist thought. The theorists from this school focus on cultural factors as agents for social change, which is a departure from traditional Marxist view with focus primarily on economic factors. 4. Woke movement. The woke movement is a social and political movement that advocates for awareness of issues related to social justice and racial justice. While it's not directly derived from Marxism or the Frankfurt School's theory, it shares with them a concern for addressing social inequities. Of course, that's patently false, because it's completely built on it. It's just built on it, as the other two were, built on the criticism of what existed previous to it. And that criticism, of course, in as they define as progress, is in tearing everything down. These concepts are interconnected in many ways, but they each have their own unique characteristics and focuses. They have influenced each other throughout history, but they are not synonymous. I hope this clarifies their relationships. And I provide in my notes the sources it used to arrive at these conclusions. To which I responded with, "You are still being mendacious about the fact that the woke movement is built on dialectic arguments derived from the Frankfurt School's criticism of Marx and Engels." Bing AI responded to that with, "I apologize if my previous responses have given you the impression that I'm denying any connection between the woke movement and the Frankfurt School's critical theory. Let me clarify. The woke movement, which advocates for awareness of issues related to social justice and racial justice, can indeed be seen as using dialectical arguments." Yeah, no kidding. This is in the sense that it often involves a critical examination of social structures and power dynamics, much like the dialectical approach used in critical theory. The Frankfurt School's critical theory, which was profoundly influenced by Marxist thought, does involve a critique of social structures that could be seen as a continuation or adaptation of Marx and Engels' dialectical materialism. So in this sense, one could argue that the woke movement is built on a foundation that includes the Frankfurt School's critique of Marx and Engels. However, it's important to note that these connections can be complex and are often a subject of debate among scholars. Again, I apologize if my previous messages were unclear. I strive to provide accurate and balanced information based on my training data, which of course, since it was trained by radical leftists, skews everything to the left. If you have any other questions or need further clarification, feel free to ask. I encourage you to ask Bing AI yourself or ChatGPT. So, the use of the conflation inherent to dialectical thinking is part and parcel of the woke left. Two or more elements which are diametrically opposed to one another, are combined and conflated to synthesize into a new, higher unity of nonsensical impossibilities. Professor Party is a classical liberal legal academic for whom application of the law, negative rights, private property, limited government, and separation of powers are foundational to the Canadian and Western legal tradition. He stated in an article to the National Post, dated September 20th, 2023, that woke wolves dominate the culture war ecosystem. For now, the masses, a herd of sheep and ostriches, follow at their own risk. This has resulted in Canada unraveling. Culture wars are making the country stupid, poor, and fractured, according to Angus Reid. These fractures have produced 5 distinct groups. And I'm going to read the entire article that Bruce wrote in the Post, and then finish with my conclusions. Last week, the Angus Reid Institute released a study on the bubbling, sometimes boiling, political conflicts in Canada. The study characterized 5 culture war factions that comprise the country: the zealous activists, the quiet accommodators, the conflicted middle, the frustrated skeptics, and the defiant objectors. They make up the political ecosystem, which is why they are perhaps best recast as members of the animal kingdom. Zealous activists, according to the Angus Reid study, make up 17% of the population. They are ardent social progressives who believe that cancel culture is about accountability. I think of them as wolves. They travel in packs. These are woke mobs pushing the social justice revolution. They hunger to rip to shreds the reputation of anyone who defies progressive agendas. Although they sometimes attack big targets, wolves prefer to hunt the vulnerable. They dress in sheep's clothing, pretending to protect the weak and the downtrodden. But when the weak or downtrodden step out of line, wolves turn on them without a moment's hesitation. Wolves appear to be more numerous than they really are, perhaps because they howl incessantly. They are proud virtue signalers. Some truly believe in the cause, but activism is also a means to professional and social standing. They compete with one another for status within the pack. This I saw in Norway among the socialist elite. I wondered if any of them actually believed the dogma that they were stating, because it was so silly. But they all competed with one another to climb the rungs of the ladder, the socialist ladder, to reach its hierarchies. Because there was untold rewards for those that were the leaders of the cultural revolution in Norway. Just over 1/4 of Canadians are quiet accommodators. Like wolves, they are progressives, tending to agree with safe spaces and trigger warnings, but they lack the intensity of a predator. Let's call them sheep. They are the foot soldiers of the culture wars. They believe in social justice dogma because that is what they have been fed. They crave approval and belonging. Some sheep don't understand social justice ideology behind catchphrases and knee-jerk reactions, but they know those very well. Sheep can be found in positions of authority where they enthusiastically enforce woke policies. They can be primary school principals, CEOs, and even premiers. They seek to preserve their status by supporting the correct attitudes. In doing so, they willingly follow wolves, failing to understand that wolves are their greatest threat. The conflicted middle makes up 18% of the population. They are ostriches who stick their heads in the sand, divided on culture wars and politics. Ostriches are ambivalent about social justice agendas and cultural revolutions. They comply to avoid any unwanted attention. Like sheep, ostriches seek to preserve their professional or social status. Unlike sheep who want to belong, ostriches obey to avoid trouble. They tend to abhor politics and prefer not to think about ideology, even when ideology won't leave them alone. Ostriches just wish the whole thing would go away. 19% of Canadians are frustrated skeptics. They view culture as tiring and unproductive. Imagine them as leopards, aware and poised but camouflaged against the scrubby savanna. Leopards object to woke agendas but keep their opinions to themselves. Some feel vulnerable in their jobs or social relationships. Others hide their opposition strategically, believing they can resist more effectively from the inside. Like ostriches, leopards are careful not to provide wolves with a reason to attack. Unlike ostriches, leopards are not ambivalent, but are waiting for the right moment to pounce. A fifth of Canadians are defiant objectors. They oppose cancel culture, safe spaces, and censorship. These are the lions, who openly roar in disapproval at the progressive transformation of their society. Lions are the only animals in the kingdom who say hell no out loud. Some have prominent public profiles, but most lions are simply fearless, ordinary people. They sometimes gather in prides, like the truckers and their supporters, but they are naturally inclined to be independent. When lions roar, wolves howl that they are bigots, populists, or members of a fringe minority with unacceptable views. Missteps are dangerous in a culture war. The pack will devour those who commit wrongthink. The most susceptible are sheep and ostriches, who, despite submitting to the regime, are apt to utter inconvenient truths. Social justice ideology is tricky. It contains incoherent positions, changes the meaning of words, and constantly moves the target. My body, my choice is a rallying cry when it relates to abortion, but racist and misogynist when it applies to vaccine mandates. Sheep and ostriches must navigate an ever-shifting landscape of rules and political correctness. Leopards can misstep and blow their cover, but sometimes that works out for the best. Once revealed, they may find that they were meant to be lions after all. Lions can't misstep, or at least in the sense of accidentally outing themselves. Out is where they're meant to be. An activist minority is setting the agenda in Canada. Vote only for as long as Canadians allow it. Be a lion, Dr. Party said, who again is Executive Director of Rights Probe and a Professor of Law at Queen's University. So that's the end of Dr. Party's article and my summating thoughts. It is vital that as Christians that we understand how the dialectic argument works so that we can reveal at every opportunity essential contradictions which lie at their core, which is why I state that wokeism is a Hegelian hermetic religion. It is built on mysticism and faith in never achieved outcomes which are never forthcoming. The very definition of utopia, which means no place. The ideologues who promote it define progress only in terms of how successful they are in tearing it all down. Net zero carbon is proof. They know they cannot achieve net zero carbon emissions. They also know carbon isn't the toxin they make it out to be. Otherwise, they wouldn't burn it at every possible chance flitting around the planet to meet with other high priests of doom to pontificate on how mankind is a Malthusian blight on Mother Earth. They just want to tear it all down. Everything that works must go. They seek to sacrifice their very way of life on the altar of their hermetic, progressive delusions. And we must not let them. Be a lion. As Dr. Party suggests, these are things to think and pray about on this September 21st. God bless you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.